Relationships deeply, deeply impact our health. Whether you're in a relationship that's not going that well, you're just breaking up, you're dating, our dating life, our relationships with our friends and our partners just impact our health on every single level. Some of you may know that I'm recently divorced and going through a divorce, and I've been struggling quite a bit, and I'm doing okay. I'm doing better and better all the time, but it's not a linear journey. And I met someone here in Austin, Texas, Chris Bates, and he is a men's dating and relationship expert, and he's a health coach who actually turned into now focusing on helping men who are perpetually single, divorced, or have recently gone through a tough breakup find great relationships. And he believes that our health, our physiological health is crucial in supporting mental and interpersonal health and the health of our relationships. And I have to say that this conversation, we went for over an hour. It was one of my favorite conversations I've ever had on the podcast. I feel like it's just such a needed conversation, especially with all that I've gone through. I share a lot of things that I've been recently learning through my own journey, and Chris is just a wealth of knowledge, and I love the back and forth that we have and the conversational nature of this interview, because it really, like, Chris's expertise really shines through in, how, like, a man's perspective, and I share a woman's perspective, and this could be on all different types of relationships. And whether you're dating, whether you're single, there's a lot of nuggets in here for you. Especially, we talk about if partners are not really supportive, if you're, let's say, more of a health oriented person, and what if your partner isn't, or what if they're not showing up in a way that is optimal for you, or maybe their behaviors, because they're not taking the best care of themselves, are really impacting you. It's a delicate subject, and we talk about what happens when we are constantly people pleasing and saying yes, and how resentment builds up, how that impacts our nervous system function. We talk about how to meet people who are also into the same things you are when it comes to health, and how to know how to define your boundaries, your values, your non-negotiables, and how important that is before you get into a relationship, or even as you're in a relationship, and how to navigate some tricky subjects when it comes to dating and relationships, and being a person who is really oriented and focused on health. So I hope that you enjoy this information and this conversation with Bates. You can find him on Instagram at Bates Dates, and then you can also find his website, batesdates.com. I linked to everything in the show notes, and I really hope that you enjoy this conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. And let's dive into the interview. Bates, thanks so much for being here. You are a local Austinite like me, and I'm happy to know you in person and have spoken to you a bunch of times, but I'm really, really excited to welcome you to the Light Up Your Metabolism podcast. Welcome.
I'm excited to be here, and I know we got a lot of interesting topics to cover.
Yeah, and today's topic is going to be really different than most topics that I talk about here on the podcast, but I feel that everything is related, right? Everything is one. How we do anything is how we do everything, and our relationships have a huge impact on our health and our well-being. So I recently have gone through a divorce, and it has had pretty significant negative impacts on my health. And being single and doing all this work, which, we'll get into, some things about me and my journey later. That's not why I brought you here, but I feel like this topic, whether or not you're single with someone, I think that you guys are all going to gain some good insight here, and I'm just excited to hear your story. So why don't we start with learning about what brought you to this world of holistic dating, or, starting to write a book about dating?
It's funny because you're absolutely right. Health is very difficult to divorce, pun intended, from relationships, as you and I have both been through divorce. And so I think inadvertently, I got here through my pursuit of health. Originally, I was obsessed with experimenting with diets and lifestyles, and that's eventually what led me to working for Heart and Soil and being the lead health coach under Paul Saladino and all these things. But I realized that there's more to it than that. And as you and I both know, stress is the silent killer. And when your life, which mine was, is in some sort of disarray, it causes an abhorrent amount of stress. And so I became fascinated about, okay, if I'm going to look at my health at a holistic lens and I'm suffering from stress and I'm starting to notice that breakdown in my body, in my mood, I'm more reactive, I don't feel like myself. There's got to be a way that this ties in with my lifestyle and my mindset. And so I can elevate health in all of these different realms. And so it really, I was an avid experimenter since I was 18, and I've always been a relationship guy, but it resulted in me almost pandering to women, and I didn't realize it. And I think something that I'm sure you probably have seen in a lot of men, especially in metropolitan areas, is that they're almost too nice. And now I don't think being considerate and empathetic is a bad thing, but just like anything, an extreme is rarely ever a good solution. And so I wanted to be as nice as possible, but I lost myself in that a little bit. I found myself doing things I didn't want to do and pandering to the women that I was dating or wanted to date, and eventually my ex-wife. And so I actually created a lot of resentment over my 5-year marriage that ultimately, and there were a lot of factors involved in it, but that was part and parcel to where a lot of issues stemmed from. And so one of the biggest lessons I learned from divorce was that I need to be what I like to call reasonably disagreeable. And for men and women out there, I think it's really important because it's where you have enough conviction to state your beliefs and your fundamentals and your non-negotiables, but you have enough flexibility to adapt to a reasonable compromise. And that's really tough to do. And so I definitely, prior to moving to Austin from Virginia in my marriage, I definitely didn't do that. And going on 54 first dates when I was ready to date again, I was really trying to refine some skill sets, and and a lot of that was reasonable disagreeability. The other parts of it was having tough conversations proactively, not playing games, closing loops, these kinds of things. But yeah, it's really interesting because I came here to work for Heart and Soil, and then I left and started my own business, and evolved from health to holistic dating, which again I believe are very much intertwined. But I would never have predicted this. And we were talking before we started. I'm so grateful for divorce because it can be something that makes you a victim. And I'm sure tough breakups for anyone listening, or tough separations, or tough relationships are all the same. You can let it hamstring you, or you can let it be your superpower, and you can 10x who you were prior. And so I don't know where I got that idea from, but I was determined to be better because of that. And so I'm really grateful for that. And I really aim to help people realize with a simple reframe, it can be something that springboards you towards who you've always desired to be. So a little bit of a long story, but that's the wrap up.
Yeah, I love that. And what you were talking to about being overly nice, it resonates a lot with something that I started to work on heavily because I only realized it like in a big way after my divorce, was the concept of people pleasing. It sounds like you're
Mm,
sort of like being overly nice could also be, be considered people pleasing. And I feel that I was definitely raised in a way to be a people pleaser. I saw my mom being a people pleaser. I feel maybe women in general are people pleasers. And
yeah.
then just, obviously it can happen with men too. And it's this difficulty saying, sort of what I've come to understand is that it's a hard time saying no, even when you feel like you don't want to say no. Like I've said, and which leads you to say yes to things that you don't want to do, which then builds up resentment. And you end up creating this life that you've said yes to, and all of a sudden you're like, how did I get here?
Hmm.
So, and then when I feel you sort of have that as a pattern, there are people who may sort of take advantage of this niceness, right? And it's not on purpose. It's just because we are allowing it. We just keep allowing it. And so this is not a like pointing fingers at anybody type of a thing, but more just, an observation of how we show up. And I just feel like I was never told to advocate for myself. It's more
Hmm.
like I would feel someone would, let's say, ask me a question like, oh, would you mind, blah, blah, blah. And I'd feel like this gut punch. And I would immediately ignore that, take it up to my head and be like, well, they did me this favor or blah, blah, blah. I would just talk myself into what I thought I should do and just ignore whatever I felt in my body. And it
Hmm.
took me a really long time to even feel anything happening in my body because I'm so in my head. And so I started to learn like, oh, you need to pay attention to that gut instinct or whatever you're feeling in your body because that's really telling you how you feel and being authentic, but also still, at the same time being kind. I think that's that sort of line that you're talking about, that dance,
Yeah.
that we have to do.
I really love that you talked about your gut, because the thing that I work with on myself the most, as well as with guys the most, is trusting your instinct, which I think is similar to your gut and your
Hmm.
intuition. Obviously, the
Hmm.
heart and the head are involved, but I think a lot of times we feel it viscerally in our gut when we are saying yes to something that we really want to say no to.
Hmm.
And so it seems like a devil's advocate or contrarian to be like, well, you need to compromise. And I do think there
Yeah.
is merit in that. But if you are compromising to a degree that you are always unhappy or living someone else's life, resentment, like we've talked about, is a very steep price to pay. And I do believe the most kind thing that you can do is tell the truth, even if it feels like you have to risk coming off maybe a little blunt or abrasive. I'm not saying you can't do both, because it is a very tricky hybrid, right? To
Yeah.
tell the truth, but also be considerate enough. But I see it time and time again in people's lives where they take just a little bit of initiative to say what they believe, what they want, what they desire, and to hold their boundaries in an appropriate, caring, kind way. And it's a long term investment in their friendships and their relationships, where I see being overly agreeable, whether it's intended to or not, as a short term plan that has long term consequences.
Yeah, I just that's so well said, and it's so aligned with all this, work that I've been doing. And I do see my divorce as such a springboard for healing, any relationship, because I realize that if I don't work on the stuff that I am not happy with and the areas that I need to heal, if I don't do that work, I'm only going to create the exact same pattern
Mm,
in the next relationship.
hmm.
And so, in a relationship, there's two people having an experience and there's ways that they're both showing up that may not be the best, and then we're triggering each other and things like that. So there's just so much to learn, and I tend to see that there's not usually, unless it's like a hyper abusive situation, there's usually there's still just so many lessons to be learned
Hmm.
out of every single relationship that you have. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do now, again, to avoid that in the future. But circling back to resentment, when we feel resentment in our body, that is such a dysregulated nervous system state,
Mm,
right? And
hmm.
so you talked about stress being something that is really can deteriorate everything that we're doing, nutrition,
Yeah.
health, diet, exercise, movement, environment. And then we're constantly in this chronic dysregulated state because we're resentful of someone. That resentment, I feel, is this like chronic low level stress that we talk about having, right? Like that's that low level thing where you're feeling resentful. It's not a quick emotion. It's a really long, drawn out one,
Mhm.
right? Would you agree with that?
I would absolutely agree. And so at Hack Your Health, which I know we both spoke at, which was a ton of fun, and you
Yeah.
did a great job. I still looked at my notes actually just earlier today,
Oh,
because
thanks.
that's where I was like, oh, I can get that sunlight helping me metabolize glucose or carbohydrates makes so much sense seasonally. But anyhow, so at Hack Your Health, yeah, you did a great job. I One of my examples was about stress management, and I painted a bingo card
Mhm.
as kind of a game as an analogy to finding insights about holistic health. And stress to me is the free space, because it can potentially be a hiccup in trying to achieve bingo, which would be in this metaphor,
Yeah.
insights about
Yeah.
holistic health. And so if you're under chronic stress due to a relationship, it is a counterbalance piece for everything that you're working on. And that's not how everything else, I think, in holistic health works. And also stress is very difficult because it's hard to see and identify and isolate in studies. So it's
Yeah.
almost more conceptual of an idea, but things like relationships can certainly have these profound effects on stress. So yes, I
Yeah.
agree with you a lot. And that's why I would urge people, because I've seen a lot of people who have their lifestyle dialed in, right? Like
Mhm.
waking up early, getting sunlight, biohacking routines, great workouts, everything from HIIT to micronutrients, and all, even having a fulfilling life and job or mission. But when the relationships are out of whack, it seems to undermine all of that. And so that's why I would urge people to not necessarily jump ship, because there's merit to working through difficulties and challenges if it's the right occasion and the right person in the appropriate scenario. But I encourage people to say, okay, what can I do to mitigate this stress? And maybe that is being less agreeable. Maybe it is having the courage to have a difficult conversation with your partner to change how your day-to-day stress levels are in your relationship with each other. But it always takes action. And so I'm always encouraging people to experiment through action, because surely anything that you try will be better than staying in this perpetual state of stress that you were talking about.
Yeah, I find a lot of people want to keep the peace, right? So
Mm.
this is, something that I, of course, have experienced in my life too, where it's like, I just, everything's going okay right now, right? I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to have this hard conversation. And that's traditionally, I would tend towards the person who doesn't have the hard conversations, and, well, I'll just do it myself. And then, that sort of maybe could be considered like a martyr thing,
Mm.
or an over functioner, where I'm doing all the things in the relationship. Again, is this creating resentment? And I find that having the hard conversations are what bring you so much closer together, even
Hmm.
though it can be, sticky or rocky in that moment.
Yeah. And the most difficult part about this is if it's a somewhat redundant issue. There's,
Mm,
like you mentioned the word triggered before.
yeah.
It's very difficult when you've been with someone for a while and you're having these very repetitive, redundant issues, because you almost instantly get triggered. So it seems like it's very hard to make progress. But this perpetual stress is a very great enemy that needs to be dealt with. And so I think, even though I'm not a fan of sugarcoating things, I
Mhm.
do think conversations like that, if there's anyone listening who feels very stuck, it's like, I don't know how to bring this up to my boyfriend, girlfriend, partner, then I would say preface it. And it's okay to have a little bit of a disclaimer at the beginning. Like, look, I know that this is tough for us, but I feel that I am perpetually under stress and I'm a shell of who I want to be or used to be. And I want to make this work. So although I know we've gotten in arguments, or if we've had discordance about this before, I need your help to do this differently. And I think if it's positioned like that, in their own words, of course, then it
Mhm.
maybe opens the person up and you don't repeat that same cycle of instantly getting triggered. And I say this as someone who's a perpetrator of this and continually working on that myself for a long time. And it's really difficult to navigate. So I wanted to bring that up specifically because I imagine there's a lot of people in good relationships that are under unnecessary stress. And so taking action to try and remedy that is probably one of the most proactive, beneficial things that you could do if you're in that situation.
Yeah, that's a really good example of how to word that. So, if you're listening, rewind, and nail that into your head and use your own words. But even just saying, like, I don't know how to talk about this.
Mm.
You don't have to always have the perfect words. I heard some saying where it's like, if a person doesn't want to understand you, or no matter how you say it, they'll never understand you, right?
Mm.
Versus a person who wants to understand you, it almost doesn't matter how you say it, they will seek that understanding. So I know that could also maybe be a barometer of like feeling safe, like, oh, no matter what, this
Hmm.
person isn't understanding me. It's like, well, do you want to be with a person who habitually you don't feel understood by, who doesn't seek that understanding and that peace, right?
Yeah.
Versus the other person where it's like, I'm gonna, sputter through this. I might not say it in the right way. I might, as long as you're staying maybe in like a regulated state, but that
Yeah.
that person will work with you to try to figure out how to come to that happy conclusion, compromise, whatever it is, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point because it doesn't have to be eloquent. It doesn't have to be specific words. I think it's the spirit of saying, "Hey, this is tough for me, and I want your help," and whatever that sounds like, being vulnerable. And then there's
Mm.
actually a friend of mine I was just talking to this about this concept with the other week. The difference between transparency and vulnerability. Transparency is the willingness to say the situation. Like, this is a tough situation for us.
Yeah.
Vulnerability is saying, this is tough and it wears on me and I'm stressed and I feel like I am not the best version of myself. And I really want to solve this with you, or however that would be. And I would just encourage people, whatever that looks like, because I think jumping from factually stating this transparency versus showing the vulnerability looks different for everyone. But just ponder on that. And it's like, what could I say to my partner in this situation that would make that jump, that would build that bridge? Because I think that will set you up for a successful conversation.
Yeah, that's really well said. The vulnerability piece reminds me of Brene Brown. I don't know if you are familiar with her
No,
work,
I'm
but
not
she
familiar.
talks a lot about vulnerability and how it really takes a lot of courage. And so if it
Mm,
feels hard to have these conversations, it's because it is hard. Like
yeah.
it takes a lot of courage to share how you're feeling with someone else. But that is something that I did learn from my ex, is that that one of the things is to kind of lead with how you feel, because how you feel is never wrong. But then sometimes that other partner might make you feel like your feelings are wrong.
Hmm.
But that's where you want to be persistent in saying, this is just how I felt. And maybe you didn't mean it this way or intend it this way, but this is my experience. And sharing your experience, I think that's one of the things. I don't know if this is just with my relationship or if this is a theme that you see with your clients, but just not sharing authentically and being vulnerable about the experiences that we're having. And I think that oftentimes I saw this I was talking with my brother and the person he's dating, and he was telling me that they were having this little issue. I'm like, it just sounds like you need to have a deep conversation about the whole thing, because oftentimes there's like little surfacey fights, and it's
Hmm.
like, what's the conversation that we're not having,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. It's
How do you
similar to
help
health,
people?
right?
Yeah, go ahead.
you,
Sorry.
you have sorry you have these symptoms, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's what these little conversations are, but just like health, there's an underlying issue and you can treat the symptoms all day, but then the origin will still persist.
Absolutely. So, what do you recommend for people to like help them get in touch with these things and kind of know when they should maybe have a conversation?
That's a really good question, and I think, I hate to parse this into generalities,
Hmm.
but I do see that women or men who are overly agreeable tend to be non-confrontational, and so I would challenge those people to have the courage, like you said, because it takes a ton of courage
Hmm.
just to initiate a vulnerable conversation. Like, that's the biggest step. That's step one, biggest takeaway. Now, for those other people, and I used to be overly agreeable, but now the pendulum has swung, and I'm wondering if I've gone too far. So I'm trying to find the middle ground. But for people who are maybe abrasive, combative, or quick to be triggered, I think the first step for them is to slow down and realize that someone's not attacking you, and if they lead with vulnerability, it's your opportunity to be empathetic versus combative. Because I'm a typical guy, right? Very, oh, I want the facts. Here's the logic, and then that doesn't always line up with the feelings.
Hmm.
So I think parsing out, like, oh, the feelings aren't trying to defy the logic. this is just a perspective that I need to understand that's almost separate from how I view the situation. And when you can see those as dual existing entities, then you're less likely, I think, to be as combative about it.
Yeah, that's really helpful. What do you have any strategies to help people who struggle with sort of that emotional regulation piece? And, again, it doesn't feel separate from health, because it's
Mm-hmm.
like someone who is, let's say, not taking care of themselves well and not prioritizing, let's say, sunlight and good nutrition, and their blood sugar is a hot mess, and they're cranky, or they're just inside and consuming a lot of TV and not, all those things. I feel that we're much more quick to anger, quick to be
Mm-hmm.
reactive, and it brings out these sort of worse tendencies in someone. So maybe they're more anxious or more depressed. So do you have any strategies for people to help with that emotional regulation?
It might sound like a very generic answer, but through the 13,000 anecdotes that I saw with people at Heart and Soil, I think, and you basically listed a lot of it off. If you prioritize movement, sunlight, whole foods, high quality, regular bed and wake times, high quality sleep,
Mhm.
and stress management, you're going to be the best version of yourself for a relationship. And I know that doesn't sound like, like a mic drop moment or anything, but I've noticed personally for myself and a lot of the guys that I work with, we are at our worst when we're not meeting the bare necessities in those areas.
Mm-hmm.
And I also don't like myself as much. So it almost multiplies
Yeah.
how disgruntled I am because I know that I could be better. I'm already not feeling myself because I haven't prioritized these things, which ultimately I need to take ownership for.
Mm-hmm.
But then I'm mad at myself for not doing it and being in the state that I am because I know I can do better. And so it almost doubles down on the negativity standpoint. And there are some people who, when they don't do those things, are not quite as volatile. But I know myself, and I know that in order to be the best person for myself, for my girlfriend, for my family, for my friends, for my clients, those are non-negotiables for me.
Yeah.
And so I guess I would suggest for people is it's going to look different, right? Some people can get away with less or they need more, but just establish what non-negotiables do you need on a weekly basis in order to be the best version of yourself. And don't do those for you, do those for the people you love. Because I think we can often lose momentum when we're doing it for just ourselves. And I think self-love is great. I don't think we should be so selfless that everything we do is for everyone around us. But the catch 22 is when I take care of myself for the people I care about, I'm going to be more consistent with it. If I'm just taking care of myself for me and me alone, it's going to be, all over the place. Or at least that's what I find with most people.
Most
I
people,
don't
yeah.
know if that's unique to men. I would think probably not, but
Yeah.
I only have a mostly a men's perspective on it.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. So here's a question that I think may, and I don't know if you have an answer to this, but we can just kind of brainstorm here. So
Mhm.
let's say mostly females listen to this podcast, and I would assume that mostly those women are, maybe they're the ones in their partnership that are doing, quote, all the things. They're the ones that
Mm.
are into the health and the, taking care of themselves and whatever. And their husbands or their partners are sort of either not concerned or not into it. And where the, let's say, the woman is realizing, if my partner took better care of themselves, they may show up better in this
Mm.
relationship. So that's one of the conversations that feels tricky to have, because we can't control other people.
Right.
And so it's, do we lead by example? Do we, like, what kind of conversations can we have to bridge that, or just start to open up this topic that is very difficult, saying, you're not doing these things for yourself, and it's, it's impacting me. Like, it feels like a hard
Yeah.
area. I don't know what the right answer is there.
I don't know if I do either, but
Yeah.
I have some thoughts.
Okay.
And I'm really curious what you think and
Hmm.
also what your listeners would think, your female listeners. Because it's a very interesting question. I'm not sure I've pondered on it that much before.
Yeah.
So the closest scenario I could put myself in to empathize would be with my father. He's, because, very traditional man, and the relationship to a father to a son doesn't always want to take the son's advice, and that's sometimes how it is, right, with the man and the woman. And so I have to be a lot more careful or persuasive or even cunning, which sounds manipulative, but I don't mean it to be, to portray these things to encourage him to prioritize his health, because he doesn't see the merit in it. And so that's honestly one of my lifelong struggles. Is I know that he would solve problems and all these things, and he's a great man, don't get me wrong, but I know that his life would be higher quality if he did these things. And I can't, I can lead the horse to water, but I can't force it to drink. And so if I'm using that as a baseline to kind of empathize for what it would be like for women to be in that situation, it's tough, frankly. Now, I do like, even though it's just a movie, I do think there is something to the phrase from My Big Fat Greek Wedding, though the man may be the head, but the woman is the neck, and she can turn the neck any way she wants. I do believe there is something to that. And maybe it goes back to having these tough conversations where, the woman may need to say, hey, I am concerned for your health, and because I love you, like I would love to see you invest in that. And I don't know if that's enough to propel a man to take action in that area. And obviously, you don't want to throw out ultimatums, right? That's the other thing. There's probably a sweet spot between, encouraging or maybe even grooming them unknowingly versus like setting an ultimatum. Mm-hmm. I don't know. That's all I can really think of. I'm curious. Yeah. What do you have any ideas, or have you tried that before? What are your thoughts on that?
So I was thinking, because this definitely showed up in my relationship and I struggled with it. And what I would do would be this was years ago. I got better, but like dropping hints. And this is literally how my mom sort of was with me. And it's really passive aggressive, and it's, again, not being direct. So I'm learning about my tendencies of being passive aggressive, which I used to just think, well, I'm just softening it. Yeah. But it's being indirect. So the idea is, I think, to be as direct as possible in a considerate way, knowing that I can't change someone, but saying that, there's something I've noticed, and that, it's so hard. So let me just, maybe I'll take back what I say, but let me just try to spitball here.
Yeah. So, I love it.
Something along the lines of that, let's say, whatever it is, your mood or how you've been communicating with me, I find that you've been maybe a little bit snappier or short with me lately. And I feel that I'm maybe noticing a pattern where it's like, if, you're spending days inside and not taking care of yourself as well, it actually impacts the way you're communicating with me, which hurts me. And so I can't tell you what to do. I'm not telling you what to do, but it would mean a lot to me if, both of us are prioritizing taking the best care of ourselves as possible to be able to show up the best in the relationship. Because I know that, you can't pour from an empty cup. You're not your best self when you're not doing these different areas of health, or I don't know. So
no, that was great.
I'll have to work through it. I'll have to workshop it more, but
no. I think that was much better than anything that I was saying, because, and I'm not saying that this is okay. This is just what I see a lot.
Okay.
Men, especially if they feel put on the spot, which I'm not sure I'm saying that they would all feel that way. Okay. But, a lot of times if there's constructive criticism coming from their partner, they're often like, okay, they take a step back. They're a little apprehensive. So I think the way that you put it was really great, and leaving it open-ended versus telling them what to do. I don't think that they want to be told what to do.
Right.
I think because they're problem solvers, they want to be like, here's this problem. Here's where I think it may benefit us, but like, you decide what you want to do to fix it. Right. And it might even be motivating to say, oh, I can do something about this problem. And you've given them enough indication and direction, but there's enough freedom for them to choose how they want to attack it and solve it. So I think, yeah, you worded that
Yeah.
really well.
And something you just said triggered a question that may be helpful. Like, what do you think that you could do to help,
Mm,
your what are some things that maybe you can do, or maybe we can brainstorm some things that maybe we can add to your routine or be consistent on, in order to help you, with
yeah.
whatever X thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
So
No, that's
framing it
good. I think
as,
that's a 50-50 because I
yeah.
think 50% of the men would be like, oh, yeah, yeah. And they would use that. And the
Mhm.
other 50% of the men would be like, all right, I think she's leading the witness kind of thing, you know?
Okay.
But,
Yeah.
but no, but I like where your head's at. And I think that's a
Yeah.
really good point. But then zooming out even further, it begs the question is, should you should that be something that you need to have a conversation about, right? Because I wonder, to a degree, as I've seen outside of relationships, people with health in general, they have to want it themselves.
Of
No
course.
amount of external pressure can really result in them being invested to the degree that they'll stick with it and change their lives. And so even in a partnership, and I'm not a pessimistic person, I wonder if it's almost a more, what's the word that I'm looking for? Not habitual, but like instinctual or proclivity thing, you know? Like I wonder how much of it is like this is just how this person views health, and it's going to be a real struggle to change them. And I don't like the idea of thinking, oh, let's just give up. I don't like
Mhm.
that at all. But from
Mhm.
having seen a lot of people, the motivation almost always needs to come from themselves intrinsically.
Yeah, yeah, and again, that can be hard because some people meet and they met because they're, both met at the gym and they're doing something healthy, like they have healthy habits, right? But some people may have met their partner in college and they were binge drinking at a frat party
Hmm.
or something, and
Yeah.
then maybe one of the people in the couple got sick and went on this rabbit hole of like turned into, loving holistic health, and so there's things that happen where some people meet and they're on the same page, and some people meet and they're on the same page, and then something happens that puts them sort of on a different path.
Yeah.
And I know that it can be hard for some people to have the the buy-in from their partner, like, hey, I want to turn all the lights out at night and put on some red and orange lights. Like,
Yeah.
some people are like, you're not going to do that, like just immediate defensiveness. So that's why I tell
Hmm.
people, make sure everyone can see. Make it easy, right? So
Yeah.
thinking again about like this compromise, it can be challenging, but
Hmm.
I think that being, I don't know, I guess my sort of call to action is being more direct and leading with the emotion that you are experiencing. So when someone doesn't hear you, like, hey, I want to do this new thing because I really want to try it. I believe it can be really helpful for us, and it would really mean a lot to me if if you would be open to trying, or
Hmm.
and seeing how we can make it work for both of us. So having one person not come in like, we're doing this, like not
Yeah.
bulldozing, but leaving space for how can we make this work together. I
Yeah.
don't know.
I think it's an excellent point. And it was also, I was kind of getting a visual of someone who's been like this couple that's been together. And let's say,
Mhm.
because you have a lot of female listeners, maybe they're investing in their health first, and maybe that's a new thing. And so their man, their partner, whoever isn't. And so they start to go off in this journey. You have this almost separation through growth. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. But I think that men and partners who are invested in the relationship, they're going to say, oh, so when they are going to notice, oh, so and so's patience with me is increasing. Their skin looks better. They look more healthy. They look fit. And they're gonna say, damn, I probably need to start doing some of this stuff because if I really want to stay in this relationship, like I need to make sure that I'm growing at the same rate. And so I guess what I'm saying, and this might sound harsh, is if you've been on a journey for a while, a health journey, and you've had some really big transformations, and your partner has witnessed that and it has not motivated them, maybe it is not time for an ultimatum, but have a real discussion. It's like, hey, this has become important to me.
Mhm.
I need to know if it's ever going to be important to you. And it depends on where you're at, right? Because some people, it's like, oh, health is my thing. I don't mind if my partner's not like that. But I know to me, that's a non negotiable.
Same.
And if I developed that in the middle of a relationship and we hadn't come into it, I would definitely have patience for my partner, but I would want them to become invested on their own and find their own version of that. And eventually I can see that being something that would, you know, tear us apart. And maybe it should, if it's that important to you, and it helps your life that much. People have grown apart for less.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, it is, an absolute non-negotiable. And, someone doesn't have to do the exact same things as I do, but that health and taking steps every day to have healthy habits and support somewhat optimal health is for me also non-negotiable. And I think how do you work with people about sort of getting in touch with their non-negotiables and their boundaries and things like that?
That's It's tough sometimes. I feel like a lot of my comments have been, oh, it's a good question. That's tough because these are great questions. So
Yeah.
I like that you're just on it. I, I like to completely divorce people, again, maybe pun intended,
Mhm.
from the idea of dating and their relationship, and just say remove all the filters,
Okay.
right? Remove the filters of what your parents wanted, what culture wants you to do, what your partner wants. If you were in a vacuum,
Hmm.
but it included the world, just not the people and their opinions, what would you do?
Okay.
And what's your 3-year vision? And reverse engineer that, because I think that's it takes away this agreeableness, this risk of resentment, like we talked about. And what it helps people do is realize who they need to become for themselves, because inadvertently that will really lead to more health in their relationships and just holistic wellness overall. Does that answer your
Yeah.
question?
So, and something you said kind of triggered the thought of that. If you're looking at, here are the things that I'm just totally not okay with, then knowing that right up front, if you're, dating someone that if they have these things, then it would be a hard no for you. I think getting
Yeah,
clear on that is really important. And then that idea that, like, you're not running towards some of those red flags because they felt comfortable in the past
yeah.
and it's familiar, that you're, and then you're also becoming a person who would attract that sort of partner, right? So it's like, how can I show up in a way where I'm also doing these things that would
Mm-hmm.
attract the type of person I like? Is that sort of what you're saying as
Yeah,
well?
for sure. So with the 3-year vision, it's somewhat conceptual, but
Mm-hmm.
then when you reverse engineer it, it comes out to, okay, what are the daily, weekly, monthly things that I need to do for me? Because then it kind of
Mm-hmm.
is a process of elimination of who you're compatible with. For example, if I'm a single guy in Austin, Texas,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, all right, I want to go to bed at 10 p.m. I want to get up at 6 a.m. and I want to take the dogs on a walk after I eat breakfast in the morning and after I eat dinner in the evening. And I want to, preserve my sleep quality and, do weightlifting and have this routine that I love, because I have a mission for whether that's my job or my hobbies that I love. And I know I need to do this to build towards building a business or investing in my hobby. Then if there's a woman that maybe first date you really like, and she's great, but she wants to stay out till 2 a.m., and she drinks and you don't. She hates getting up early. She doesn't prioritize her health. She's a cat person. Like, even if you like her personality and you're somewhat enamored with her on first appearance, I think it just really helps guys lay out where they can compromise without resentment, and where, again, these non-negotiables exist. And I don't think it's easy to do that. Like, it sounds simple, but that's why reversing the 3-year vision is really helpful, is because sometimes people don't even know where they want to be in 3 years. And then they have to think about it. And then when you reverse engineer, you're like, oh, in order to build this thing or to get better at this skill, I have to put this much time into it every day, every week, so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not thinking about that when they meet someone. They're not thinking about that when they're compatible with someone. So it makes it a little more tangible. So as they can, because I think we can get too in our heads. So on one hand, this helps a lot because it's a frame of reference. But on the other hand, you can be too strict with it, that you start to have an unrealistic expectation of what your 3-year plan will look like. So as much as it's a tool, it is a double-edged sword. So I would encourage people to say, okay, use this as a loose framework, but unless something is absolutely a non-negotiable, don't think that every part of your routine has to be something that your partner mirrors, if that makes sense. There's got to be some degree of flexibility to that.
Totally. And it sounds like at the end of the day, if you distill these things, that a lot of values need to line up, and that maybe some of the details aren't quite as important. But I love the idea of knowing yourself so well and knowing what you need, and making sure there's space for that when you are with another person. So, for example, my ex was a big TV watcher, and I've probably turned on the TV in the last 6 months since I've been living alone. Probably 3 times.
Wow.
And I'm not better than anyone because I don't watch a lot of TV. I'm using this small screen, and so, but it's just, how I want to spend my evenings, and just knowing, wow, I really don't like to watch TV every night. I don't want that to be my go-to. And just really getting clear with that for myself, so that I'm not finding myself just flowing into that other person. And then again, you're feeling resentful because it's like, how come I lose every single night to watching TV because it's, addictive and I want to spend time. And so, like, knowing that kind of stuff ahead of time can be really helpful for, being able to maintain your boundaries, but also to attract, the right partner. And yeah, I love what you were saying there. So one of the things, let's back up to, you mentioned that you're recently divorced. When we were chatting off air, you said that you kind of felt like you were damaged goods, and then there's this reframe. So if someone's coming off of a breakup or a divorce, and then we can lead this topic into maybe dating. So we've talked about, in relationships, and now let's kind of shift to this gear. So someone's coming out of a breakup, a divorce, and they're feeling broken, and maybe there's like this stigma that they're divorced, and what do you do from there? What do you suggest for people, or what was your experience?
I think the first thing that people need to do is define a period of time where you focus on reflection and healing, as cliche as that sounds. And that timeline is different. There's not a sweet spot. There's no algorithm that spits out the number of days that you should do it, or what exactly that will look like. But I think it's a really good time to feel the pain, because if we do not feel it, if we artificially push through it, or if we expedite wading through that discomfort, it comes back to bite us. So I don't know how long that takes I'm sure it varies depending on all the variables, but you will know when you have fully waded through the pain. And there's no other way for me to describe it. It's ineffable, but just make sure that you don't expedite that process, because it will come back to bite you. And during that time, there's going to be a lot of reflections, and you're going to realize new non-negotiables. You're going to realize what you could do better. And as long as you reframe it as a stepping stone versus some sort of cross that you have to bear going forward, it's empowering. And I think that was the most powerful reframe for me. And that's what I spend a lot of time trying to help men with, because I thought that, I failed at a marriage. Therefore, that means the women that see me in the future when I'm single will see me as a failure. But what I realized was it actually communicated that I was committed and I wasn't willing to give up, because I stayed in this marriage for 3 years after it was really tough. And then we were able to close the loop and have clarity that, like, we weren't meant to be. And it was very amicable, and it was very pleasant and all these things. But had one of us kind of thrown in the towel or been a little more nasty, which I know happens, then it would have been harder to come from that and have the clarity that it did. So I think challenging yourself, even before you're single again, to be as reasonable, as amicable, as loving, as kind as possible on the way out. Just like, I hate to compare it to this, but I think it's true. Like with a job, it's a relationship in a way. Like there's expectations, you're negotiating, you have duties and all these things. On the way out of a job, if you give your 2-week notice and you're just not doing any of your work and whatever, it's like it's kind of a bad look on the company. Or if the company treats you terribly on your way out, you're never going to forget that. But if both parties can maintain to the best of their ability the expectations and the agreements they had prior, it actually ends on a really good note. And I think then it enables you to have a lot more clarity, completely close the loop, so that after you go through this phase of being alone and reflecting and wading through all of this discomfort and pain, it's a chrysalis. You come out a fresh butterfly, and people can feel it. That energy after somebody has been through something like divorce or a tough breakup, but they've healed fully, is magnetic beyond compare. And you'll know, because once you get there, it's like you're not even asking for these opportunities, this attention, but you get noticed. And so I think that's a really beautiful thing. And not to put the cart before the horse, but the pain is really pertinent in order to achieve that, I think. And something else that's, I think, really important about this phase is this kind of duality of giving yourself grace, but also taking extreme responsibility, right? And the way that I would express that or encourage people to kind of use this self auditing on themselves is, it's okay to admit everything you could have done better. Mm-hmm. But you also have to realize that you're in a tough situation. So it's okay that you didn't do it better, if that makes sense. And now this is a stepping stone for you to try again and for you to do better than before. And if you hadn't been lackluster in some way, you wouldn't have this beautiful opportunity to do better. And it's the same thing with health, right? When we get a little out of shape or we have these challenges, it's like an opportunity for us to learn and grow. And that adds a nugget, of knowledge or whatever it is to our bushel of nuggets. And then you become that much more richer in terms of, wealth and health and knowledge and quality of life. And so I guess the big reframe, zooming out, is how many nuggets can you acquire from a relationship, whether it was a disaster or it was an amicable divorce or separation or breakup. There's so many nuggets to be found. Mm-hmm. But the catch-22 is you're not really in the mood to go searching for nuggets, but there's so many there. And so if you can reframe it, then I think you can harvest those, and it really pays off in the long run, and it'll get you that much closer to who you should be with.
Yeah. Okay. I love all of that you just said. So I would just want to kind of sum up some of what I heard and what I can remember. So there's so much to learn from every relationship, and that if it ends, then it's a real great opportunity. And even if it's not ending, it's like, what can I learn from the current state of what's happening? So getting really curious, that can also help disarm a lot of perfectionism tendencies. So we can have that with health, or like this anxiety about like, why isn't my relationship where it should be? It's like, maybe we can get curious and look with this open, compassionate type heart, instead of shooting ourselves, like, you should be doing better. I should have done this differently. And just look at things with this really honest, like taking radical responsibility for your piece in it. And again, this could also be if you're in a health challenge. It's like, what can I take radical responsibility for? Is it that I am absolutely addicted to my phone and I need to do something to put boundaries around this? Like, what can we get really honest with? And then also feeling our feelings. So if that's, after a relationship ends, not pushing through and trying to feel better because we should. So same thing with health. If you got a diagnosis or you have something, feeling what it feels like to like, instead of like, oh, I shouldn't feel like this because other people have it worse, or like, at least, I don't have X. Like, so being honest with what we're feeling and actually feeling those things, and giving ourselves the grace and the space to sometimes do nothing, sometimes just be alone and have that cocooning stage where you're, inside and you need to take a break from people. So it's like, I'm talking about like if a relationship ends, but I'm also, talking about health. It's like, it's, everything is connected. So
I think there's a lot of parallels between those two, especially. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I just relate to what you said too about, knowing when you're ready. And I feel like I'm getting there, but I'm not quite ready to,
Mm,
put myself out there and date yet. Like I'm doing like a really deep healing journey, and I'm allowing myself for the first time to just like do nothing. But then it's like, am I really like, it's like, okay, I'm starting to feel like I'm avoiding things. So
mm,
it's like, getting curious about that. Like, why am I
mm.
avoiding? Why am I avoiding things? It's like maybe because it feels a little too raw, and like I'm not ready to get hurt yet. It still feels
Yeah.
like this open wound, and I'm not ready to put myself out there. So I'm trying to be okay with the fact that this is my timeline. Right.
Hmm.
So I think so many of us are so not okay with what our timelines are with anything, with health, with healing. It's like, oh, I'm really trying to lose weight. I'm trying to fix my blood sugar or whatever it is. It's like, if you're not okay with how long it's taking, it can make things worse.
Yeah,
you know?
it goes back to the stress piece, right?
Yeah.
If you're really frustrated with your timeline on the health of the relationship piece or anything, it's going to add perpetual stress because you're going to have these unreasonable expectations and you're going to be disappointed, and it's going to lead to self-loathing and all these other things. And again, you go back to being this resentful, disgruntled shell of who you desire to be, who you ought to be, who you have the capacity to
Mhm.
be. So yeah, it's a very similar thing, and something that I have had to work on a lot and that I work with people a lot on
Mhm.
is is battling lonely energy. I didn't come up with that phrase, and honestly I forget who did, but
Mm.
you can be driven by lonely energy, which I think is a lot of times why people rush through this phase, because they're not used to being lonely.
Mhm.
And it causes you to date prematurely and sometimes even settle into a next relationship,
Mhm.
or even do things in the dating scene that you're like, oh, this doesn't really feel like me. And so one of the biggest pieces of advice I would throw out there is, you'll again, goes back to the intuition and the gut thing. If you find yourself dating and your gut, like, it doesn't feel right, or you're kind of falling for somebody but like it feels not too good to be true, I think that feeling's different. I think that's more
Mhm.
of like a fear based, like, oh, something might happen again and this person's too good to be true. But
Yeah.
if you're dating and you're excited about it but you're like, something doesn't feel right, it's probably just a sign to slow down, because
Mhm.
lonely energy is a very powerful thing, and it can be a very incognito sometimes. And typically you will, part of the wading through the pain is a very sharp, intense feeling of loneliness. And I think most people have to feel that at its climax before they can move through it and discard it. That's just a theory. I don't know that, but
I
I would just, if
relate to
anyone,
that.
yeah.
I relate to that so much, and I think that's one of the hardest things is that feeling lonely is a really horrible, uncomfortable type of feeling. It's different than like solitude, or like, oh, I'm just by myself. Like when I was in a relationship, when I was in my marriage, I was like, I like space. Like I like to be by myself. And then I'm like by myself, I'm like, I don't like this. So so
Mm.
it's, I mean, we also have to remember that we still have this primitive brain where if we are alone, we perceive we're like kicked out of the tribe or going to get kicked out of the tribe, that meant certain death. So
Mm.
it's, we're battling these sort of older concepts that our brain just feels like, it feels so much dysregulation when we are alone. And interestingly, that I learned that one of my sort of go-to coping mechanisms for feeling alone is emotional eating, sugar.
Mm.
And so I'm like, oh, okay. So like the first couple of months after like sort of living on my own, I was really emotionally eating a lot. And so it was, I like, again, how, relationships or breakups, whatever, can really, really impact our health, because I
Hmm.
was kind of sabotaging my health. So I had to
Yeah.
make this radical decision of like, hey, let's take a look at what's happening. Let's take inventory. And I, was really trying to be gentle with myself, like, hey, you're doing the best you freaking could, and it's okay, and now I've really cleaned up my diet, and it feels so much better, and I feel so much more in control of what I'm eating. But there was that little transition period where it was almost like I decided to stop. And for me, I was able to do that with a decision. For some people, it's not that easy. I tend to have that mind where if I make up my mind to do something and I really commit to it, I will do it. It's not like
Mm-hmm.
that for everything. Eating tends to be, working out, journaling, meditating. I don't have
Yeah.
it on lock like that. So again, not better than anyone. It just happens to
Yeah.
be that one thing that I could, kind of control a little bit better than others. But when I made that decision, the first couple of days, anytime I either felt a negative emotion or something got hard at work or I felt a little bit stressed, I'd find myself getting up, walking towards the kitchen or being in the kitchen. I'm
Mm.
like, what are you doing? Like I'd just be in
Yeah.
there and I didn't have any, I like didn't buy any of the stuff for myself. And I'm just like, why are you in here? I'm like, you're having a hard emotion. I'm like, okay. So then it's like, you can, be light with yourself and be like, oh,
Hmm.
here it is. Here it's showing up. Like, good thing I don't have the stuff in the cabinet or in the fridge or whatever, because I'd be eating it. So I just thought
Yeah.
that was a really interesting piece.
It is, and there's three things that I want to touch on that I thought was really cool that you shared. First of all, lonely energy is definitely related to control because you feel when you're at towards the climax of loneliness, you feel like you almost have no control over yourself, maybe even your emotions or maybe your life or whatever. But I would say that that's a positive thing because like, okay, this is going to be over soon.
Mm,
So when it feels that bad and you feel those things, take it as a canary, in the coal mine. Like you're going to get out of this sooner rather than later. And then the second was, I honestly just forgot it.
jump to the
But
third.
yeah, the third thing about all this is the parallels between relationships and health. They go very deep, and I think it routine isn't everything, right? But I'm a person of routine. You're a person of routine. We're very biased about that. So I would say people tend to, again, the pendulum swings, and when you're lonely and you're recovering from something, you can go to extreme.
Mm,
Yes, it's good to build structure in your life,
mm-hmm,
but I like to ask my clients to say, okay, imagine you are in a relationship now, but you have enough independence that you're not codependent and that you can still live the life that you want to live. What does that look like? And
mm-hmm,
use this opportunity being single and alone to start building that. So you're not building a life that doesn't have room for someone to step into it, but you're building
mm,
a life that has all the things that you want with a little bit of a nook or cranny or sliver for someone to fit into it, as long as your non-negotiables aren't out of alignment. And so I think that's something else that's maybe unique to
yeah.
that time period, because that way you don't feel like you're not working towards a relationship. You're just not really with a person, but
Yeah.
you're working to build, I call it setting the frame, right? Like
Mm,
before you worry about what the counter is going to look like or the drapes, or you even have the insulation in it, you set the frame of the house.
right.
And then you can add all of the accoutrement that makes the house feel like it's a home. And the relationship is like that. It's a structure, right? There should be fortitude. There should be, it should build out in a way that you can live in it, but also someone else can live in it with you. So use that lonely period to set the frame.
Love that. Yeah, that's really, really good. So, what about someone who's dating? How do people who are health oriented meet other healthy people? I mean, if you live in Austin, Texas, I feel like it might be a little bit, tiny bit easier. Hopefully, I mean, I live here, so hopefully that'll be the case. But what do you suggest?
I think Austin is unique because there are so many community events and it's very health conscious. I mean, there's still, party scene, a
Mm-hmm.
few other scenes that are, very common in metropolitan areas,
Mm-hmm.
but it kind of goes back to setting your frame 1 degree from that. It's okay. What activities would you do that align with your 3 year vision or your ideal life? And then look for people that are there. And so you can, and I think this was actually my second point. We are social creatures. So when you are in a post breakup or you're single or maybe you're alone before you start dating again, you don't have to be in total isolation. That's a great time to double down on friends and family and time with yourself reflecting. And then I don't think you'll feel as alone. And then
Mm-hmm.
you can segue into investing in the activities that make you come alive. And I think you're more likely to meet someone there than you are at a bar. Now, I would be a hypocrite if I said the apps don't work, because that's how I met my girlfriend. But it was lots of hours, several dates. I don't know how many hundreds of matches and times that I was ghosted or some kind of weird situations. It's like looking for a needle in the haystack, but you do find a diamond in the rough sometimes. But I would say for men and women, this is a beautiful time post-COVID, especially in cities like Austin, to just go out and do the things that you love, and you will always meet new people. And at least you have that thing in common, whether that's pickleball, whether it's going to the dog park, whether it's, we have Barton Springs in Austin, but like, a pool or a spring or going on hikes or wherever. You can find all kinds of groups too through, meetups, local events, Facebook groups, whatever, where people are meeting new people, especially in cities, because it's so transient. It's almost easier to meet people in cities than other places. Like back home where I grew up, I have friends there and there's no new people. There's not much going on.
Yeah.
But with cities, you just have to have the courage to put yourself in situations where you may not know anyone. And that's scary, but it is also, I think, the most fruitful in terms of meeting new friends, solidifying your frame, and meeting potential partners or dates that you have some degree of alignment with. And it's a lot better than the bar, a lot better than apps like Tinder, in my opinion. I like Hinge personally because I think you see more dimensions from people. You get to learn about them a little more. Yeah. But that's what I would suggest. And maybe that seems like an oversimplified answer, but just go do the things you love that are community involved, and you'll find yourself with a lot of people that you could see yourself enjoying getting to know.
I love that. That's really helpful. So what are some challenges that people might face in the dating world?
I think we talked about this for a hot second before we went on air, or whatever it's technically called. I think modernity has put men and women in a tough situation because men end up being more agreeable, too nice, because of a variety of factors in the culture, the Me Too movement, a lot of different things. And then so they're not as courageous when it comes to approaching women in real life, and they're relying on the apps or just kind of fire emojiing people's stories on Instagram and more cringy stuff like that. They don't have the huevos to approach a woman, properly, in my opinion, and tell them, hey, I don't know anything about you, but I noticed you and I would love to take you on a date to get to know you better. It's like how many women wish that they had a guy come up to them and ask them that, in an appropriate scenario out in the world. I think a lot of women would. That's what I hear, at least. And so I think that's one problem is guys are losing their spine, partially because of cultural things, partially because of health things, right? Testosterone levels are lower than ever. Yeah. We have an excessive amount of toxins and xenoestrogens, and people aren't prioritizing their health. And we have a lot of the medical narrative isn't really helping men optimize their health. And it's the same for women. Women's hormones are all over the place. There's a lot of stressors, perpetual stressors that weigh on them. So it's difficult to be this playful, feminine, woman that they desire to be. And because of the modern world, they have to provide for themselves and kind of take the masculine role because maybe they don't have anyone to lean on. But then that becomes so much second nature, or almost their default stage. Then when they do meet the right man, it's kind of hard to transition out of that. And I don't blame men or women for this. Yeah. These are just the predicaments that I see, because then you have men and women with really good intentions, but they're almost in the inverse of the roles that they could create a good partnership from. So instead of, filling in each other's cracks, no pun intended, they end up, butting heads because they're trying to do the same thing. And then sometimes you even see, I was talking to some friends out of town about this the other day. You see if a man is behaving more feminine, then he attracts more masculine women, and vice versa. Yeah. And which is really interesting, because then let's say then they start to feel safe in their partnership. Well, what if the man starts to step more into his masculine? Then they butt heads. What if the woman starts to step more into feminine? Then they butt heads. And so I don't have an answer for this. This is just one of the bigger hurdles that I've seen, especially in metropolitan areas. Now, I'm not saying women can't have businesses and be boss babes and get shit done. But in their relationships, there has to be there has to be a differentiator in their roles. Otherwise, they'll always be competing versus supporting each other.
Yeah, it's that important polarity I feel that is
Mm-hmm.
needed. And I feel that as a female that I've almost been sort of conditioned into this like hyper independent state. And I think,
Yes.
I heard someone say on a podcast that I feel that toxic masculinity, which is not all men, but toxic masculinity has been really damaging to us on a societal level. And like, I think that some of the trauma from that is manifesting in women being like, we can do this anyway, or like, I can do
Yeah.
that. And like, it's not that we can't or shouldn't, because I'm not suggesting anyone do anything. It's just we're just riffing, just
Yeah.
observing. But I notice that I show up because I'm, very independent. I'm very motivated and, I have my business, I'm doing all the things, and then I just do everything. And it's
Yep.
just like, and then there's no space for me to be held and for me to like ask for help. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, I don't know what it is to step into my feminine energy. So it's something I'll have to find out,
Yeah. Yeah.
and learn about. But it's something that I want to work towards so that I can find someone who has this sort of healthy masculinity to balance out and support my healthy femininity with, of course, ability to flow and things. But
Mm-hmm.
in general, it's like, if I'm showing up in this way, then how am I going to, like you said, it would not be that dynamic polarity that attracts. It would sort of start to repel, like two like charges
Yep.
repel each other, right?
Yep.
So yeah.
There's, I love all of that, and I'm going to tell you why. I want to talk a little bit about what this toxic masculinity is, because I think it's different than what people like. It's a different origin than what people believe.
Mm-hmm.
And then also what I believe is the antidote for men and women with this kind of issue of not realize, like this polarizing issue, or competing or not being able to be fully in their masculine, their feminine. So the first thing is, with toxic masculinity, it is not hyper masculinity. It's not men being men. It's men being spineless but pretending to be men, and they don't have the courage to have tough conversations. They don't have the courage to be vulnerable. They don't have the courage to close loops and be radically transparent. They're not willing to take ultimate responsibility for the whole situation and their actions. They're not able to have the perseverance to lead with love and to have the patience that is required to understand emotions when they're thinking with logic. That's the opposite of being a man. So it's not hyper masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
Toxic masculinity is actually a pseudo weak version of masculinity, in my opinion.
Yeah, I love that.
And I've been there.
Yeah.
And I've been there because and I'm not proud of it, but we get swept up in it. It's part of modernity. It's part of culture. But as soon as you identify that, then as a man, like I just get shivers, as egotistical as it sounds, listening to myself talk, because it gets me amped up. I was like, yeah, I'm going to be the opposite of that. Like, you get driven. So the first step, I think, for men is identifying that. And then for men and women, I think part of the solution is developing a toggle. Because again, you have this business, you're helping women. There's nothing wrong with that. And if you have to tap into your masculine to achieve those things, that's great. But then can you flip the light switch? Can you toggle into a relationship and not have to have that same demeanor that's like, I'm going to get shit done, and kind of be, like you said, more flow, kind of, let someone lead, or maybe even be more playful than because you can't afford to do that sometimes when you're providing for other people, yourself, or building a business. Sometimes you can't afford that. So can you toggle? And likewise with men, sometimes, and I have this problem too, when you run a business or you're trying to, be the breadwinner, or just be, tap into your masculine, you don't know how to toggle into your playful side. And a lot of times women need to see your playful side too. Like, yes, it's good to solve things, to get things done, and to be efficient, and to provide, and all these things. But you should also be able to have a good time. And sometimes when women come to you with their problems, it's about being silly and making light of the situation than it is solving the problem. And I think so both ways, men and women, toggling is in the modern day. I don't know that this would have been needed evolutionarily, but
Mm-hmm.
with what the hand that we're dealt,
Yeah.
it's a really an underdiscovered and an undiscovered skill, and probably a really marvelous skill in terms of turning the tides. You know.
Yeah. Just so profound. I've loved every second of this conversation. I feel like it's the nuance that was needed, and I'm so glad that we're talking about this on this podcast because like we said at the beginning, it's not separate from our health journey. Like we have to be like, I don't know anything that could, I guess I do, but a relationship that's going sour or that's not good has such a profound impact on our
Mm-hmm.
health and well-being. Because if you're in a horrible relationship or if you're struggling to meet the right person, if you've just gone through a breakup, all of these things are impacting us on a big scale. So it's been great being able to chat about all these things that have never come up on the podcast before. So thank you so much for this conversation and for your approach and for your insight. I think that any guy who works with you would be is going to be so much better off. So tell us where we can find you and how you work with people and who you work with.
I predominantly on Instagram. I'm not a big fan of social media, but I understand the utility in it. So I'm trying to inspire other guys to, take action and becoming the men that they've always desired to be, to not only have a high caliber woman in their life, but also for all the other benefits that come with that. So Bates Dates, my last name, Bates, is my Instagram. I'm also on YouTube with Bates_dates. And then my website has some fun stuff on it, and a ebook on hormone optimization. It's tailored towards men, but there's a lot of great takeaways for women there too. And that's batesdates.com. But more than any kind of self-promotion, and I wanted to say, I thought you had brilliant questions. These are not the questions I normally get asked. And so I've really enjoyed this conversation. And I wanted to offer kind of not a disclaimer, but
Mm-hmm.
something that's really good for people to hear. And then a takeaway is I'm figuring this out. These are all theories based off of anecdotes, but I do believe a mountain of anecdotes is a shred of reality and a shred of truth. And so that's what I believed about health. And that's what I believe about relationships too. So I would encourage anyone out there who also thinks, hey, I don't really know about this. It's like you have anecdotes all around you. Learn from the people around you, learn from yourself. And as long as you're being honest with yourself and honest about those people, you will have your shards of truth as well. And the takeaway is for men and women, as much as relationships are amazing, and you should absolutely prioritize having the right person in your life, partnership, the catch-22 is you need to have a mission greater than yourself in order to be who you need to be in a relationship. And I'll just leave it at that.
Food for thought. Love it.
Yeah.
Mic drop.
But thank you very much. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for being here. I appreciate it.